Hello. This is different for me. I've never done this before, but I have had a few people kind of ask me, how did you make your game map? What program did you use? And what kind of tips might help me make my own. So this is my island map. It took me about 15 hours to make. Don't let that intimidate you though, because it depends on the level of detail and finish that you want and your skill level as well. That being said, I am a graphic designer, so I'm relatively fast at this type of a thing, but I've never made anything quite like this before. I usually do stuff for work and it's boring and basic, and it's nothing interesting and fun like this. So I think I probably spend a lot of time just playing with it and kind of redoing things 80 times. So it doesn't necessarily have to take you 15 hours to come up with something that you like. And this is just my style. This is just my take on it. Of course, you can do any number of things, and I'd actually be really curious to see what some of you may have done or what this video might have helped some of you to do. And if you have any questions about things that I'll skip over, because there's going to be a lot of things I skip over, but if there's parts that you want more detail about, just let me know. So I have used Illustrator. That is just the program I like, but I mean, you could use various other programs to do this, whatever you're comfortable with. I think basically I'm going to ignore everything on the outside of this map for now, because it's like the logo I put together. It's, some images of my villagers that I just grabbed online. I just did a Google search and pulled the images. Just some pictures of my island and some text. And some clouds that I literally just took off a vector site. So nothing too intense about that part. I just took 80 years to find the layout that I liked for it. So I'm going to turn these layers off so we can kind of focus on what we want to look at. Good. Okay, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit, just so you can get an idea. I know my map actually, when you see it on Facebook posts and stuff, it does not look very detailed, but when you zoom in, there's actually quite a bit of detail here. It's just that Facebook does compress images quite severely. So this kind of just gives you an idea of what it looks like when I'm building it. You just don't get that level of detail in the finished product necessarily. So this is where we ended up. Where we started is here. And that's quite a difference. A lot has changed, but you can see all the shapes are there. So I really used the in-game map screenshot as my Bible to basically figure out exactly what I wanted to do here. I did add a lot of elements, of course, a lot of paths and stuff. I basically just took a printout once I kind of had most of the basics traced, and I drew on it. I just ran around my island, and I was like, okay, there's stone paths here. There's some, this is where a tree is. I would literally go in and go, okay, there's a tree here, and mark it on my little printout. And that was really, really helpful to sort of add those details in. But before we even get into any of that stuff, let's just take all of the pretty things away. We'll even take the waterfalls away. So this is really like the most important part of the map. This is the basic part that is traced from your screenshot. You can see it looks a lot more similar with all the other stuff there. And this is going to be probably the most useful thing to try to get your base built up, no matter what you want to do, no matter what kind of decorations you want to add to your map. So what I'm going to do, so that you can kind of see where things came from, I'm going to literally take my game map. I'm just going to put it at about 50% opacity so that you can see through it and you can kind of see the layers that I'm building on top of it. So I had my game map. The very first thing that I wanted to do was, of course, get the ocean in. So I just put literally a big rectangle of water. That's not super helpful. But the first part that I actually overlaid in there was the beaches. I'm going to turn everything else off so you can see that. So here you can see this sort of tan shape all the way around, and those are all the beaches that I drew in. And you can tell, if I toggle back, yep, not super helpful. Do it this way. So you can see that the edges here, those all match up exactly, more or less, with my in-game map. But this edge is really, really basic and wonky, and that's because it's going to be covered up by our ground. If you want to, you can be super fussy and like go in and do it exactly, but there's absolutely no need. It's just a waste of time, at least if you're building it this way anyway. So I went in and threw in those beaches, and then over top of that is your next layer. So the beaches are sort of, if you think of it, like the closest to the ocean. And then the next thing that you'd build over top, at least the way I designed it, you could do it a little differently, but I put my rocks in. So once again, anything that is not going to be covered up by a layer in front of it, like the grass here, I made all really exact and exactly where they fall. But if it was going to get covered up, forget it. Just made the lines all janky. And I just zoomed way, way, way in, like all the way in, basically. And it's really pixely and it's nasty and it's kind of hard to see exactly, but if you drag that off, you can tell it's not too bad to follow. So I just basically used a line tool, and I just blah, 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 followed it around. You can use curves if you want, just by clicking and holding to get some curved lines, or if you want, I mean, especially how zoomed this is going to be. It's going to be super zoomed out by the time you go to use it. Just, do small straight clicks to make curves. Saves a bit of time, and you don't need to be too precious with it, considering it's going to be super zoomed out. So if I go back out, you can see we've got our beaches and our rocks, and then the next thing I added in was the main level of the ground. So maybe I'll turn those off just so you can see it a bit better. And here again, there's certain parts where the cliffs are going to be covering it. And you'll notice I filled the whole dang thing in, like it's all filled in. And that's because something will cover all parts of this because it's your grass layer. So whether it's going to be water, cliffs, whatever, something's going to cover it. Not too worried. So again, I didn't have to fuss on the inside. Just made the outside accurate, more or less, and didn't worry about the rest. So then I added in my first layer of cliffs, so you can see it kind of lightens a little bit. I just made the colors brighter as we went up. That was just what made sense in my brain. And once again, if I knew there was another layer of cliffs on top, I just left that area completely solid. And yeah, just went through, detailed around trace. It's a lot of tracing. It's a lot of tracing. But it is honestly pretty zen. You just kind of put on some music or something and go for it, and you get through it pretty quickly. And then this is our last layer of cliffs here. So now we've built up the rocks, the beach, and all of these other elements that include all the ground layers. So the next thing I did was all of the water. I have a lot of water on this map, but I went through, and that wasn't too bad. Just trying to get that all in there. And you'll see, of course, all the shadows of bridges. That's just from my original game map, basically. That's just showing through. So this is actually a good place to just kind of show what the map looks like now. This is a really cool base that you could pretty much go in any direction you wanted to from here. This gives you a really, really good foundation, and you can just decorate any way that makes sense to you from here. What I wanted to do, just because I have a complete ton of waterfalls, is I wanted to trace those as well. Pain in the patoot about that is there are, if I show you just the game map, there's no indication of where waterfalls are, and that always kind of bothered me because I thought, I have a ton of them. It's one of the features of my particular island. I'd like to show them. So it was kind of a pain. I did that thing where I did a printout, just like I very briefly mentioned before. If I do this, I don't care about the clouds. There we go. I took this actually. Once I had this done, I just ran around my whole island, and I was like, okay, printed it and just basically said, I can see I have a tree here, I've got a waterfall here, and I just literally took a pen and marked all the waterfalls with little lines. I marked all the trees with like little X's or whatever I used, I can't even remember. And I just basically marked anything that wasn't visible on my original game map that I wanted to include, because it is so basic. There's not that much on there. So I ended up adding paths that were just custom paths, so they wouldn't have shown up. You're not gonna, like these are all in-game paths. The type of custom path I used, I really couldn't put an in-game path down first because it wouldn't change the shape. So I just had a ton of areas with custom paths, so it was a lot of marking up. And that was probably one of the most tedious things. But again, it depends whether you're even interested in doing that. Some people might not need to do it at all, so that would save a bunch of time. And you can also randomize where a lot of your trees are if you want to. I chose to sit there and actually like try to plot every single tree because clearly I'm extra. It's just kind of how I am. But there's no need for that. If you don't want to be specific, don't be specific. And the trees that I made, I'll kind of get into that later. Those, I tried a few things, and in the end I just ended up taking images off the internet and tracing the trees because I got fed up with trees that didn't look the way I wanted them to look because, again, extra. Definitely not necessary. It's just, I like to torture myself. So what we kind of ended up with, if I actually turn off the original map here, once I had drawn all those lines to show where the waterfalls were, I went in here and I just sort of added them all in. What I did, I'm going to turn on another layer here really quickly. This is my oh my goodness, she's not that organized area. I tend to use the edges of my artboard as just a place to throw junk. So these are, bits that I grabbed online, waves that I thought I'd add in the background and never did, elements that I considered adding to my logo, pictures of my island, just a mess of stuff. So in amongst all this mess are those trees, a bunch of other elements and paths, but what I want to look at is the waterfalls. So these were two different options I considered. I figured this one was probably just too detailed. I liked it, but there was a lot going on there. So I just ended up using a gradient, honestly, going from the color of the water to white or slightly off-white. And I just literally threw that gradient anywhere where there was a waterfall on the island. So it has a kind of a nice effect, but it's pretty simple. The only thing that was a pain was basically taking them all and trimming them down so that they kind of fit into the areas that I had. And you can see this looks a little bit haphazard, but that is because other elements will be on top. So you can see that this outline here actually covers all those janky edges. Interestingly, the path does go over top of that. Not too worried, you can't tell in the final product, but you will almost always, when you're doing a big project like this, you'll find things where you're like, oh yeah, I didn't mean to do that, but oh well, that's just part of it. There's a lot of moving parts in here, and it's not really about being perfect as much as sometimes I try to convince myself it is. So this is kind of what I ended up with, just this gradient, and I would just adjust the edges here to fit the shape that I was working with for each section. And that's all I did. I just literally I had hold shift so that you don't end up going like, woo. Nope, not that. Yep, like that. That's an extreme example, but you don't want to have these weird angled lines. So if you just hold shift while you're moving, that is going to make your life a lot easier. It's going to lock the vertices so that you can't so easily jump off of them. Boom. And I did consider actually turning them this way so that the water blended down. Just ignore that it doesn't fit in here, but I did almost consider blending it this way, but I just felt like it didn't have that sense of impact where it's just sort of hitting the water. That's just my preference. So that's basically the gist of all of the land. I did put that edge around all of my water, and that was honestly to hide. Stuff that I just didn't feel like making super clean, like these waterfall edges. So yeah, just add a line, hides everything, kind of defines things a bit. Yep, it's a way to just be slightly lazy. Yeah, so beyond that, everything else is just a lot. Ooh, and I've got both of my labels on. I started out with some really tiny labels for my text, and I realized pretty quickly that once I put this on Facebook, it was like, it felt like it was like this. It was completely unreadable. So I did end up keeping those small labels just in case, but I blew them way, way up, and then they were actually legible, which was nice. Beep. So That's really basic. That's nothing too complicated to get to that point. From there, it can be as complex as you want. So, like I said, these trees I traced, I think I just drew some squiggly lines for the grass, copied and pasted them randomly. These planks, I just drew a shape. Same thing for these little paths. I just drew a shape and then I just kind of very helter-skelter just kind of copied and pasted them in a weird sort of random layout in quite a large piece. And then I would just kind of move it around, copy it, paste it, and delete any parts that I felt were extraneous. And that's when layers are really, really a huge help, because originally I did not have all of my paths on one layer like they are right now. It was sort of like everything was separate. So if I was like, oh geez, I've got a couple of these little stone paths that are too far into this area, it was really easy to just go in and delete what I didn't want. I wasn't gonna hurt any of my other paths or objects. So layering is kind of your best friend. And if you need dozens of layers, do it. Who cares? You can always condense them later. Anything that makes it easier for you to do what you're doing, just do it. Just do it. Okay, so where did all my stuff go? Come back. There you are. This is basically all of the trees that I went through. So I did start, I think my version of this tree that I tried to come up with on my own was so bad I just deleted it out of rage. So I don't have that example anymore. But this was a tree. I'm like, maybe this will work. And a palm tree that I had found online is just a vector. And I was like, I don't know, maybe it'll work. No, made me angry. Didn't like that they didn't look exactly like the in-game trees. So instead, I ended up tracing trees from the game. And it was just like the map. Like I basically took an image, a screenshot, traced it out bit by bit, and then just shrunk it down. And that's the same for this guy as well. I put a white box on all the trees that I actually ended up going with. And you can see I went through a few different options for like, how do I shade this? I do enjoy the way this tree looked with the shading kind of all over the place, but once I threw them on the map, they were super distracting, which was not really what I was going for. And I think that's sometimes too much is too much. So I ended up going with a very simple outline. I adjusted the colors to try to give more contrast between everything. And I ended up with like a very, very flat looking tree, which may not appeal to you depending on what you want to do. But I kind of wanted them to blend into the background a little bit. I didn't want them to stand out too much because they weren't really the focus for my island and for what I was doing. So there is a very distinctive flatness to it, which does become a little problematic when you get into this fairy forest and it's just basically a sea of green with no definition between them. It might have been worth it to add a bit of a shadow behind them, but it's just not where I landed. So definitely lots of things you can do to play with that on your own. These are also some of my path bits, and this is what I was talking about where I was saying, I just sort of made a sort of random grouping, and then I would, oh, I know why. There, better. I would basically take it and I'd copy, paste it, flip it around, and I'd kind of piece it back together in different ways. And I kind of built like a larger section with this. And again, I've since deleted all of that because I didn't expect to be making a video on it. And then I just kind of pulled some of it apart to kind of randomize it a bit because you don't really want it to feel quite that repetitive and perfect. Like your eye will understand that there's repetition going on, which isn't the biggest deal, but it's just something that bothers me. So I would go through and just kind of play with it a bit, pull some stuff apart, and it kind of made a big like texture that I could just drop wherever I wanted and then delete the extraneous bits. I sort of did the same. I could have just used clipping masks, but again, I like to make things more difficult for myself because that is somehow more entertaining to my brain. So I ended up grabbing a bunch of stone paths, and if one was going over the edge, I just, this is so stupid, don't do what I did. I basically, if it originally looked like this, I'd be like, okay, I'll like literally like drag it so that it fits inside. This is I was tired. I was super tired at this point. I think I just wanted something brainless to do. So I didn't have my hurting brain just complaining to me that I was making it do too much work. But you can just use a clipping mask. That's way faster than what I was doing. Yeah, and then like you can see these are just repeated. This is just repeated and rotated, and it's pretty basic, especially if you don't do it the way I did. And this line is just a copy of the shape below it. And yeah, these are just, I think they're like 42 opacity. I think I got a little fancier. Yeah, I got a little fancier on this path. And I did actually change, I think it's just the opacity I changed. No, I actually changed the color. Yeah, okay. So I changed the color of a few of these to something slightly darker here and there to kind of give more of like a cobblestone feel. Again, totally not necessary. I think I was just starting to lose my mind at one point. Interestingly, I thought those bridges looked different. Oh no, okay. This was another thing I went through, was denoting bridges and inclines. One thing I found was a little bit tricky is a lot of the bridges kind of look like this dock does, where you've got these planks, which is great, that's fine. But I was starting to have visual confusion between these bridges and my ramps, because the ramps I chose were basically all stairs. I didn't have any of the grass ramps, I don't believe. I think I got rid of all of those. Pretty sure. So yeah, there was this visual confusion because they both had these horizontal lines, and I kind of thought that it's a little annoying. So I did simplify my bridges quite a bit. These were just like, okay, there's some posts on the corner, sure, I'll add those. But I decided to make the stairs a bit more detailed than the ramps. Wait, nope, stairs a bit more detailed than the bridges. There we go. Just so that you had some visual, simple cues so that you could easily pick out what was what. And the way I did that was actually it's pretty basic. Just took some shapes, put them over top of another big shape. And I just repeated it down so that you get this sort of stair effect. Especially if you have sort of like a narrower area and then a larger area, you're going to get more of a sense of like a step and then a small incline, a step and a small incline. You can kind of picture it in your head a bit better, or at least I could. Made more sense to me visually. Yeah, and then I just added like little stone paths. I actually mimicked the stone in my game, the actual path that I picked, because again, just far too extra for my own good. So the path that I chose had like a single stone, it had a set of 3 stones, and it had a set of 2 stones as well as an individual. I didn't copy them precisely, but I gave that a general idea, and I just kind of threw them down in any old random place. Totally not necessary if you don't want to. Even this was kind of totally unnecessary, but it just sort of shows paths you can take to get places when you have to jump instead of just walking normally. I don't know that they really show up very well on my Facebook post, to be honest. I think they just kind of look like that, which maybe not helpful. But when I was working on it, at least it did make sense. So I kind of had them just to delineate movement, but yeah, that's basically what I did. Can't think of too much else to talk about. And yeah, areas like this where it looks like, whoa, what the heck is going on? There's so much happening. Again, keep in mind that I didn't do anything too intense for these ground layers. Like, it's a huge block of basic grass, huge block of first level of cliffs, second level, and then the most complicated part was just adding the water and these waterfalls and then the edging. So it looks like you would have to do quite a bit of crazy work at first glance, but it's actually not that bad. This was actually a technique that, I mean, it seems pretty basic. Start from the bottom, build your layers, build up, cover things up. It seems pretty basic, but I didn't think of that on my own. I actually worked with somebody at my job who professionally makes maps in Illustrator, and this is what they did. Started from the ocean, built their way up, and I thought, oh, yeah, that's easier than what I was thinking of doing. So that's just a technique that I've pulled into other things that I do because it works really well. And I think it really cuts down on your workload rather than trying to draw the outline of the edge of the water when you're trying to just make some land and then drawing the outline again for the water, or copying and pasting your old outline and inverting it. You don't need to be doing all that. Oh yeah, other random things I added in was I added my little moon. I've got a moon sitting here, so I just found like a random vector moon and I threw it in there. I also added one up here. Don't know why, I just felt like it. I like my moons. It took me so long to get those moons, let me tell you. That recipe was, I think, the last one I got. It's brutal. The randomization of those recipes seems a little bit lopsided. It didn't need about 15 different wands, and then, yeah, the moon and the moon chair and the Nova stars, I think, were like the last things I got. It was utterly painful. Yeah, I also added things like gardens, really basic shapes. Yeah, just a lot of copying, pasting, tracing. The Zodiac Shrine here. This is like one of the, this is definitely the thing I spent the most time on at my island, that I was the most proud of, and I couldn't find any visual representation for it, so I was like, whatever. I just took a screenshot of it, just took a picture of it, and then I went into Photoshop and I just cut it out, basically. Ooh, in fact, I did not cut out the sky, so that's my in-game sky there. As I said, you're going to find weird little flaws in a big project like this, and you just ignore it, because nobody's going to notice. And I just kind of put a faded gradient at the bottom here to sort of kind of blend it into the grass, and I called it a day. I'm like, at a distance, it'll be fine. I did the same thing with my house, because I was able to find vector images of like the campground and these buildings online. Again, I think I just Googled like Animal Crossing New Horizons buildings or something. I don't know, I'll see if I can find that, but yeah, I just grabbed those images. They even had all the different variations of the dock, which was really cool. So they had like the red, it was blue, orange, green, yellow, something like that. They had all those variations, which was really, really nice. So I could just pick out the one that worked for me to match mine. I think they even had different build levels of the museum. It was pretty cool. I quite appreciated that. But if you didn't want to do that, or if you wanted a more realistic look, you could do what I just did with these two buildings and take a picture in your game and then just cut them out. If you're going to do that with buildings, I would definitely suggest trying to take as straight, centered, and level of a shot as you possibly can. If you're up high looking down at it, or you're kind of looking up at it, that'll reflect obviously in your cutout. And when you stick it in your map, it may not look the way you want it to. That being said, maybe you want a really like top-down view of these buildings. It might be difficult to consistently do. That's my only concern with that, because you do need to have like some cliffs or something that you can kind of climb on to get that up view from where you are. Yeah. What else? Anything else? Oh yeah, again, these little dudes, I just found their faces online, and I didn't feel like putting all their houses in, so I just didn't. I considered putting their houses behind their heads and then their head over top, and I'm like, no man, it's too busy. There's too much going on. So, I mean, there's different ways you could do that. You could use their faces like I've done. You could put their house in there and then put the name of the villager below it or something. Yeah, there's tons of different ways you could do that. So it just depends on what you like, what's interesting to you. Oh yeah, and then I did Anka's pyramid because I was really happy to get the pyramid. It took a while. Other than that, no, can't think of too much else. There's the text. I just literally wrote the text and then I put a layer behind it and just kind of bumped it over a bit to kind of make that text pop and stand out a bit more against the busy background. Other than that, yeah, the logo, I picked a font that I liked and just played with, as you can see on the left here, quite a few different elements that I just found online, just vector pieces and bits, and I originally had planned on using way more things, obviously, than what I ended up with. But I thought it was simple and it was cute, and I just went with that. Yeah, my clouds. Bing. There we go. Again, I just grabbed that online from like a random... Ooh, I've moved the ocean. Oh my goodness. You're not really supposed to do that in life. There you go. Order is restored. That's why we lock our layers. There we go. Do not destroy the landscape. Yeah, I just grabbed these clouds online and I just sort of layered them in like various opacities. So what do we got for this one? You are 25%, and then like, yeah, one down here is going to be way, way, way more. Oh, no lies. Also 25. So, okay, in that case, what it is it's just the compound effect of having a bunch of them over top of each other. And I had forgotten I did that because I think I played with this endlessly. The clouds, for some reason, I just kept fussing with quite a bit. The only thing I don't like about the clouds is they do... I could have fixed this if I wasn't so tired after the 15 hours. Here I kind of blended in. I just used a gradient between my ocean color and my watercolor on my island. I made those two different colors just to kind of distinguish. They do it in the game too. So I just kind of used a gradient between them to blend it, and I was like so proud of myself. Then I added my clouds, and I was like, oh, there goes my gradient. So I could have fixed that if I wanted to. I was so tired. It was really late at night. I think it was 3 in the morning or something on my second day of doing this. And I just didn't care at that point, so I left it. Yeah, other than that, I just threw in some pictures from my game, added little drop shadows, little boxes on them, and some text about my island. And I think that's about it. Yeah, so this is very rough audio. The whole thing is probably not super polished. I've never, ever recorded my voice for anything or filmed anything other than videos of my island itself. So yeah, it's pretty basic, it's pretty janky, but I'm not a YouTuber, so we're not gonna worry about it. If there's anything that I have not made clear, I'm sure there's probably quite a few things, because this is just me running through it off the top of my head without planning, because that's always what you want to do in life. If there's anything else you want to know, let me know, and I will try to answer your questions. Other than that, I hope this is of some use in between my rambling. And yeah, I'd be really happy to see if you had done something because you saw this video and you were like, okay, it doesn't seem as scary as I thought it was going to be. If you tried it out and you made something for yourself, I would love to see that. I love seeing custom maps. It's really fun to get an idea of what everybody's done and kind of the different styles and the different methods of doing things. It's really cool to see. So yeah, if you got through this whole thing, that's impressive. Awkward as this was, but I hope it at least shows you a little bit of what happens in the background. And trust me, I cleaned up this background area a lot. There was way more junk up here. This process is never a straight line. It's a lot of trial and error, so don't get too frustrated if you don't like what you're doing right away. Just keep trying, take a different tact, walk away, take a break, come back. Like I said, this was 15 hours for me, and I sit in front of a computer and I do graphic design for a living. So even I got frustrated at points where I was just like, if I could throw this island off my screen and out the window, I would have. But again, that's partly because I am extra and I can't let a lot of shit go. I have to kind of go in there and overdo things, which is not necessary. It's whatever you like, whatever you're comfortable with, and whatever works for your island. And yeah, I'm going to stop talking now because that would be a good idea. Okay, bye!